When most people think about Salem's Lot, their minds immediately go to the vampires, to Kurt Barlow's pale face, to glowing eyes and dark windows, and to the familiar imagery of coffins and fangs. But the deeper you sit with the 1979 adaptation, the more you realize that those supernatural elements are only surface-level horrors masking something far more disturbing beneath. What makes Salem's Lot so disturbing isn't how evil enters the town, but how easily the town accepts it. The story doesn't begin with supernatural violence. It begins with quiet cruelty, indifference, and people looking the other way. By the time the vampires start feeding, Salem's Lot is already spiritually hollow. Because what Salem's Lot ultimately reveals is not just a story about creatures of the night invading a peaceful place, but a story about how a town that is already morally exhausted, emotionally numb, and spiritually hollow becomes the perfect environment for evil to thrive without resistance. The true horror of Salem's Lot does not begin with bloodshed or violence, but with silence. With the quiet, everyday failures of compassion, responsibility, and courage that have already taken root long before Kurt Barlow ever steps foot in the town. By the time the vampires arrive, Salem's Lot is not an innocent victim waiting to be corrupted, but a community that has already learned how to ignore suffering, normalize cruelty, and excuse its own inaction through routine and familiarity. Even before the supernatural enters the story, the town is defined by small but deeply revealing moral fractures. Neglect is treated as a private matter, and cruelty is dismissed as none of anyone else's business. There is a shared understanding throughout Salem's Lot that something is off, that the town carries an unspoken weight, but there is also an unspoken agreement that no one will be the one to confront it, because doing so would disrupt the fragile illusion of normalcy that everyone clings to. This is what makes Salem's Lot so uniquely disturbing compared to other vampire stories, because instead of depicting evil as an external force violently invading a healthy community, it presents evil as something that simply takes advantage of a place that has already stopped protecting itself. Kurt Barlow does not need to charm the townspeople, manipulate their emotions, or seduce them into submission, because the groundwork for his success has already been laid by years of denial, indifference, and moral fatigue. The darkness in Salem's does not feel imposed from the outside, but rather like an inevitable consequence of long-standing neglect, as though the town has been quietly preparing itself for collapse without realizing it. The Marsten House, often viewed as the epicenter of the town's evil, functions less as a source of corruption and more as a symbol of everything Salem's Lot refuses to confront about itself, standing above the town like a physical reminder of guilt that has been deliberately buried rather than addressed. Everyone knows the house's history. Everyone understands that something terrible happened there, and yet the town collectively chooses to treat it as an uncomfortable footnote instead of a warning, reinforcing the idea that ignoring the past is easier than dealing with its consequences. This refusal to acknowledge old wounds becomes one of the most important reasons new horrors are able to take root so easily, because unresolved trauma does not disappear. It festers, waiting for the right moment to resurface. One of the most unsettling aspects of Salem's Lot is how people begin to vanish not all at once, but gradually, in a way that allows the town to rationalize each disappearance as an isolated incident rather than a growing pattern. Children go missing, families begin behaving strangely, and death becomes increasingly common. Yet the town responds not with urgency, but with denial, clinging desperately to the belief that life can continue as normal if everyone simply refuses to look too closely. This denial is not just a background detail, but the central mechanism that allows the horror to escalate, because the vampires do not need overwhelming power when the town itself refuses to acknowledge reality. Kurt Barlow's design reinforces this idea, because unlike many cinematic vampires, he is not charming, romantic, or human-seeming. but overtly monstrous, animalistic, and visibly inhuman, stripping away any illusion that he could be mistaken for something benign. And yet, despite how clearly dangerous he is, Salem's Lot still fails to stop him in time, not because the threat is impossible to identify, but because confronting it would require breaking the town's long-standing habit of silence. Barlow succeeds not because he is subtle, but because Salem's Lot has been conditioned to look away, to doubt its own instincts, and to prioritize comfort over confrontation even when the cost of that avoidance becomes deadly. Time and again, characters sense that something is wrong, but instead of acting decisively, they second-guess themselves, worry about being embarrassed, or assume that someone else will take responsibility, allowing the danger to spread unchecked. This diffusion of responsibility becomes one of the most frightening elements of the story, because it reflects a very real human tendency to wait for permission to act even when the threat is obvious. Ironically, the children in Salem's Lot are often the first to recognize the truth of what is happening, because they feel the fear directly and intuitively, without the layers of denial that adulthood has taught them. But because they lack authority and are repeatedly dismissed by adults, their understanding offers no protection, reinforcing the story's bleak suggestion that wisdom does not always belong to those with power. As the town continues to fall, its collapse happens slowly and incrementally, with each small loss making the next one easier to accept, until the cumulative damage becomes impossible to ignore. By the time the truth can no longer be denied, Salem's Lot has already crossed a point of no return, demonstrating how communities often fail not through sudden catastrophe, but through a series of quiet, tolerated compromises. What makes this especially unsettling is that Salem's Lot never portrays the town as uniquely evil or exceptional, but as ordinary, familiar, and deeply recognizable, suggesting that its fate could belong to any place that values comfort over accountability. The 1979 adaptation reinforces this idea through its deliberate pacing, lingering on empty streets, silent rooms, and long stretches of stillness that allow the audience to feel the weight of the town's decay rather than simply observe it. Instead of offering a triumphant restoration, the story ends with abandonment, as the surviving characters leave Salem's Lot behind, implicitly acknowledging that some places cannot be saved once their rot becomes systemic. This refusal to provide a comforting resolution is precisely what gives Salem's Lot its lasting power, because it suggests that evil does not always end with victory or closure, but sometimes with acceptance of irreversible loss. Decades later, Salem's Lot remains deeply unsettling, not because vampires are frightening, but because communities that ignore suffering, protect appearances, and refuse to act are painfully real. In the end, Salem's Lot is not a story about monsters hiding in the dark, but about a town that refuses to turn on the light, even when doing so might have saved it.